Well, my clock says 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get going. I'd like to call today's Board of County Commissioners meeting of Thursday, August 9th to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if folks could do me a great favor and be sure your cell phones are silenced or that you're carrying on conversations outside the room, that would be fantastic. Also, if you have not had a chance to do so already, please sign in at the back of the room when you leave so we know who's here and how to spell your names if you testify. So to begin with, are there any public announcements? Other than if you have not already, come out to the Western Montana Fair. It is now open, and at least so far, the air is not too choked with smoke. So get out there and have some fun and buy some corn dogs and enjoy. Any other announcements by staff? Okay. Is there any public comment on any item that is not on today's agenda? So if what you're here for is something on the agenda, which should be in the back of the room also, there will be an opportunity for you to comment on that. So if there's anything else on your mind, now is your opportunity to bring it to our attention. Okay, seeing none, we will move right on. Our current claims list, this would be for claims received between July 26th and July 31st of 2018 by the Commissioner's Office. Totals $2,068,422. And as I've mentioned before, if you're interested in the specifics, go to the electronic version of this agenda and you can drill down to see what that amounts to. So we have 3 public hearings today. This is your opportunity to weigh in if you're interested. We'll begin each public hearing with a staff report, followed by an opportunity if it's an item being represented by a specific applicant to provide us an additional report on that item, and that will be followed by an opportunity for public comment. So I'll go ahead and open the first public hearing. This is a petition to abandon a county road. Steve Nide. I have Sam Scott listed here, but Steve, please fill us in.
Am I live? Steve Nide, County Surveyor's Office. For the road viewers report for Speedway Avenue in East Missoula, Section 24, Township 13 North, Range 19 West, PMM. Date of viewing was August 1, 2018. In attendance, Gene Curtis, myself, Steve Nide, Al Cepeda, Dale McCormick, and Matt Smith. At approximately 10:45 a.m., the attendees met at the site of the subject right-of-way. An investigation and discussion ensued. No public access to public land would be eliminated. The undersigned road viewers recommend abandoning the portion of Speedway Avenue described in the petition. And that's all.
Okay, would the petitioner or petitioner's representative like to say anything? Mr. McCormick.
Hello, for the record, Dale McCormick with PCI representing Al Cepeda. I handed out a 3 pages that Gene and Steve, when we did the site visit, had to look at. And so the first page shows the right-of-way that was abandoned as part of the highway construction, which is Lot H on that. So this is in essence extending that to the east. And the second page shows the area that has been petitioned to be abandoned. And the third page shows a multifamily and single-family project that Mr. Cepeda is developing, that area would be used as parking. And all of the adjacent ownership is owned by Mr. Cepeda, and I'm here to answer questions if you have any, and would ask for your support. And thanks for the site visit. It's always nice to be able to get out of the office and see things on the ground. So I'm here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is a public hearing. Is there any public comment on this proposed right-of-way abandonment? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Questions or comments from the commission?
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify. In the report, it says that it was at 10:45 PM and that it was at 10:45 AM. Is that correct?
We have corrected.
Okay.
The one that's going to go on the record, yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Steve caught that. We were there in the daylight, not the dark. So I did join the petitioners and Steve on site. If you look at the big picture, this road dead ends against what is now the fence that goes along the interstate right there. And then if you look to the, let's see, I guess kind of to the northwest of Lot H, that's where you see the little barber shop as you come into East Missoula. But there's really quite a few feet of difference in elevation there. It drops down to that, so it's not practical to be a road anymore. So before the interstate, it probably made sense. It's also an interesting project in itself, and so this road abandonment to me also meets some other goals that the community has in getting some more inventory of both rentals and potentially houses to own. So those little triangle shapes on this page are, while they're a small footprint, they're going to be 3 stories high, and they would be for sale as single-family homes. So I think this is a good decision for us to do, and there's no need for what we really consider in this is whether the road is needed for the future for the public. It is not, but it will be used as part of the parking for the project. So I agree with the viewer's report, and Steve and I have both signed it with the right time on it.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments? Sam, I didn't give you an opportunity to say anything if you wanted to. Okay, you're good. Okay, is there a motion?
I would move that we accept the viewer's report as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So our next public hearing, which I'll open, is on a guaranteed maximum price for the library. There's Dory. And I should say that we'll probably, maybe Dory has some additional late-breaking information. Okay,
Updated
Dory
info-
Brownlow will provide the staff report.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And yes, so this is the time for the commission to approve the guaranteed maximum price in the contract and approve a resolution that is presented to you. In the resolution, you're accepting the guaranteed maximum price and looking at the sources. So then we will proceed with the bonding. And if you have some questions about the financing, Andrew Charney is here too and could answer those. There was a question about insurance that I had visited with you earlier, and a question that we needed to have resolved. I think for the present time, in working with the contractor, Dick Anderson Construction, we have resolved that question. We'll need to get a policy review, but they're comfortable with proceeding with the contract at this time if the commissioners approve it. So if there's any questions about that part of it, or if Andrew has some details on the financing and bonding, we could ask those too.
Sure. Andrew, is there anything you'd like to add or elaborate on? There might be people here who are not familiar with specifics, so.
Yeah, it's, just to recap quickly, the voters approved a $30 million bond issuance for the library financing, and part of that bonding, the commission passed a financing agreement that said that the library would provide funding over and above their bonding capacity to meet the needs of the so-called partners, the partners in the library. And they have, in fact, brought to us in cash and CDs close to $5,650,000. I think we're still waiting for a $200,000 contribution from MRA, but we should have that within a day or so, is my understanding. So with that, I'd recommend going forward with the project.
What is the guaranteed maximum price that we came up with then?
It was 36.7, that's right. I don't have my glasses here, Dory.
I miss glasses. $36,708,504.85. Well, that's not the maximum guaranteed price.
Is it what's in the resolution,
For
just
28,000,
36,000?
I'm sorry. Yeah, the total price is what I was, with the pre-construction and all the services, but the guaranteed maximum price is what is in the resolution, 28,774,049. So that will be the amount that's in the contract, the GMP contract.
Okay.
So everything above that is being raised with private money. This is what will be guaranteed with the bonds.
These are the project costs, right, that the contractors now guaranteeing this price on. The architect's fees are not included in this, and
So that's the difference between the 28 and the 36 million? Architect's fees and what else?
it's the other contributions for the partners, for the Children's Museum, for the,
The 6,325,000
right.
down in the next whereas. Okay.
Okay. Honor, anyone from the library like to say anything?
Honor Bray, Director of the Library. We're very excited that we're at this point and that we could reach consensus with Dick Anderson Construction on a guaranteed maximum price, and excited to move forward. We're very pleased that the foundation could raise such a great amount of money in 2 years' time, and that's why we're here today.
Okay. Thank you. Dory? Oh, okay.
In the, I thought I just mentioned in attachment A to the AIA contract, which you have in front of you, it lists the sources and revenues, sources of revenue, if that is helpful. The library's contribution shows that much of this has been paid from the foundation. So you have the architectural fees, design, those costs that they paid early on, fencing, all of those costs were already paid through the library foundation. So they are part of that $36 million figure.
Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing. Is there any public comment on the guaranteed maximum price? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Curtis?
So I guess I just need, because it doesn't, we often need to have the exact motion written down. So is the motion just to approve the guaranteed maximum price as reflected? Should the motion reflect the dollars? Which dollars should it reflect?
Sorry about that. So I think the motion should reflect that the commission, if that's what you make, is to accept the guaranteed maximum price of the 28, sorry, I'm thumbing through the 28 million.
Okay.
That is on the resolution. You should have that resolution in front of you. So you're accepting the guaranteed maximum price and authorizing the chair to sign the guaranteed maximum price agreement. So there's two separate documents that will need to be executed.
And we're all signing the resolution.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Motion, or was that your motion?
I can do it. And Dory, you dropped your phone. It's on the floor. Okay. Didn't want you to be looking for it later. I move to approve the library guaranteed maximum price of $28,774.49 and sign the resolution and execute AIA A133 guaranteed maximum price amendment.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We look forward to seeing construction. So I'll open our third and final public hearing today. This is for the proposed Woody Mountain Court subdivision. And we'll begin when he's ready with a staff report from Casey Drayton.
Casey Drayton, planner with Community and Planning Services, here to present the Woody Mountain Court 25-unit mobile home court major subdivision. The applicant for the subdivision is Grail Enterprises LLP, represented by Territorial Land Works. We have the owners as well as Paul Forsting with Territorial here with us today. This subdivision went to the planning board hearing on July 17th, 2018, and it's here before us on August 9th, 2018. Project location is out in the West Riverside area. It's located just north of Interstate 90 and south of Highway 200, just to the east of the Clark Fork River. It's legally described as parcel 1D1 of Certificate of Survey 6443. And looking at the existing conditions on the property, we can see it's a primarily vacant site. We do have Highway 200 directly adjacent to it to the north. We have Tamarack Road just to the southeast of this subdivision. And Pine Grove Lane, you can see there is the dirt road that kind of bisects this property from starting at the north at Highway 200 down south towards Tamarack Road. Other than that, we don't really see any improvements on the subdivision other than some utilities that have been laid through there in the past. These shots will reflect what we just went over, that there's not much out there. There's a mix of semi-mature and mature trees scattered throughout the property and then some open grasslands. The Woody Mountain Court subdivision proposal is for 25 mobile home spaces on the property. Each of these spaces will be served by a new road that'll be developed bisecting the property. It'll kind of mirror how Pine Grove Lane currently functions, running from Highway 200 over to Tamarack Road. It is worth noting while we're here that this property was formerly the site of Woody Mountain subdivision, which was a mobile home court subdivision approved in 1998. That approval was extended until about 2000, at which point it expired. So a very similar looking proposal did come forward some 18 years ago, and since it's expired, they're back here again today. Mobile home courts do fall into the category of subdivision regulations. It would effectively end up as a one-lot subdivision with a preliminary plan as opposed to a preliminary plat approval. That plan is really memorializing how many spaces are on the property, where they are, and then the infrastructure that accompanies those units. Looking into the review criteria for subdivision requests, the first one we have is zoning and growth policy compliance. This property is located within the 1998 Urban Comprehensive Plan area. The property is designated primarily as residential 2 dwelling units per acre. There is a small sliver of the property that is designated as parks and open space. That's located at the northwest corner of it. And the property is also unzoned within Missoula County. The density of this proposed development comes out to 1.93 dwelling units per acre. That's just slightly less than the 2 dwelling units per acre recommended in the plan. The plan recommends a couple different tiers of density, and this one being at 2 dwelling units per acre is right in the middle. It gets up to 6 dwelling units per acre as well, and the 2 dwelling units per acre basically goes to say that there's some local services available to this location, but maybe not everything, such as municipal water and sewer. That could support that 6 dwelling units per acre. Looking at ag and ag water user facilities, the property is mapped as prime farmland if irrigated. A soil evaluation in 1997 was found to be consistent with the mapping. It's not estimated that soil profile has changed too much over the years. There may have been some fill placed on the property since then, but other than that soil evaluation should hold pretty true that we do have prime farmland if irrigated. Areas of disturbance are evident from vehicular use as well as utility transmission, which have disturbed some of those soils, and we can't confirm with any of the fill piles that you can see out there were from the site or from an alternate location, so we're not really sure what those are. The area has been designated for residential use in the urban comprehensive plan as opposed to some sort of an open and resource or more of an agricultural designation. So we are looking towards residential use here. Surface water rights are associated with the subdivision. However, no means of delivery is available to the property. Groundwater rights are also associated with the subdivision site. However, those are designated for domestic purposes for a 25-unit mobile home court, which is the proposal in front of us. CFAC did visit the site and make a comment that was included in the agency comments with the application packet, stating that they do not oppose the subdivision due to the lack of viable agricultural operations and noted their support of affordable housing. Looking into the local services here, I will first talk about roads. This subdivision's in the urban area and subject to urban standards for transportation. Road A is going to be our primary access for all the units within the subdivision. I've highlighted Road A in a kind of a light blue color there to try and help you out visually in describing the road network that we have here. Road A will be the primary access and proposed to be paved at 24 feet in width, meeting subdivision regulations with no parking on either side. This road will provide multiple access points for ingress and egress, which is required for major subdivisions in the wildland urban interface. There's no right-of-way or easement you may notice over top of this road. That's not required in a mobile home court subdivision per subdivision regulations. It'll be a private road, and it's essentially a one-lot subdivision, so it's just providing access to the people who are permitted to be on that property already. The covenants were noted as allowing for guest parking on the road. A condition of approval requires that to be amended to prohibit parking because the 24-foot wide road per subdivision regulations isn't wide enough to accommodate parking on the road. A condition of approval recommended by staff also requires 3 guest parking spaces. That's in accordance with subdivision regulations. It calls for 1 space per 10 units, so we would come out with 2.5 spaces. So staff rounded up to 3 in that case, seeing that it's really not an overwhelming amount of parking. I believe the applicant proposes to put in more than the 3 spaces, even with the final layout and design of this. Pine Grove Lane was the existing road that we saw that bisected this property. It's proposed to be reconfigured with this subdivision and is the subject of one of the variance requests associated with the subdivision here today. Pine Grove Lane was formerly came in off Highway 200 where we see the access still today. It would have came down through a little bit of this purple access that's proposed to remain and then would have crossed where the red is. The subdivider is proposing to eliminate everything that I have highlighted in red here and reconfigure Pine Grove Lane to utilize this access shown as the now purple line. It would meet up with the existing Pine Grove Lane about where the mouse is shown, halfway across the development area. The remaining portions of Pine Grove Lane would remain as is, so that's a dirt road that's approximately 20 to 24 feet wide. It varies a little bit through there. The reconfigured portions would be paved to 20 feet in width. Subdivision regulations would call for a 24-foot wide road there as well, so that is the subject of one of the variance requests. Staff is recommending approval of that variance request to allow for a lesser road standard. That Pine Grove Lane is being maintained as an access to adjacent properties to the south. I think there's about 6 properties down there. I can't confirm exactly how many units there are on those properties. It's not believed that there's any sort of legal access to those properties. The subdivider is not proposing to cut off the access. He's simply reconfiguring it and paving a portion of it. It will change it a little bit how it flows through there, but they would still have the ability to come off Tamarack Road just as they always have and trace back into the west to get to their homes there. There has been some adjacent property owner comments received, 2 letters included in the staff report that were a little concerned about the reconfiguration there and how that would affect their properties just to the south. Those letters are included as attachments to the staff report for your review. Looking at non-motorized pedestrian facilities within this subdivision, The applicant had proposed an 8-foot wide pedestrian trail alongside proposed Road A to serve as the access to units within this subdivision. Subdivision regulations call for an 8-foot trail on one side of roads serving the subdivision, or 5-foot wide sidewalk or trail on both sides. Those would need to be separated by a 7-foot boulevard. The applicant has requested a variance to allow for the elimination of that boulevard. That's depicted on the diagram I have on the screen in front of you. At the top, you have the 8-foot pedestrian trail directly adjacent to the 24-foot wide traveled roadway surface. Staff is recommending approval of this variance, subject to the condition that the pedestrian trail be raised a minimum of 6 inches above the grade of the road surface to help with pedestrian safety, delineation, make it a little more visible, try to prohibit cars from parking on it. It just creates a little bit of a grade break there so that people know that there is a difference between the trail and the road surface. Subdivision regulations also call for extending the what's referred to as the Bonner Streetcar Trail east across the frontage of the subdivision. This trail comes out of the Bonner area, currently ends at the other side of Tamarack Road on the adjacent property. The section of regulations from the subdivision regs is quoted up there at the top. Essentially, the subdivider would need to take that trail and stretch it across the frontage of the subdivision. It's a fairly long frontage, and the applicant has requested a variance from the actual construction of that trail across the frontage. They are proposing to put in place a 25-foot wide public access easement if that trail ever were to be constructed by some entity other than the subdivider. Staff is recommending denial of that request, seeing that the non-motorized connectivity to the Bonner area, schools, the Milltown State Park, Blackfoot River area would provide nice functionality to the subdivision and allow that connection. Every trail needs to start and end somewhere, and we realize that it doesn't go past where this subdivision would be or past Tamarack Road currently, but this is the next leg in the segment there, so it would be good to see that completed. Looking at water and sewer aspects, the water will be a public water supply system. As mentioned, they do have a groundwater right to allow 2 wells, which will provide water to the 25 mobile home units for domestic purposes and irrigation on the property. The sanitation component will be a level 2 treatment system. This is located off at the west side of the property. This will be a shared system. It is required to have a groundwater discharge permit as well. And because of the level 2 system, the amount of people using it, it being a public system, and the groundwater discharge permit, it is heavily reported on and regulated. And I'm sure Paul will be able to share a little more detail on that, as he knows the specs on all that's required to get that permitted and maintain the operations of. Staff feels that they will not negatively be degrading groundwater quality in this area from that sanitation component, which will be reviewed by, of course, the local appropriate authorities and DEQ at that time. Looking at the parks and recreation aspect, mobile home courts are required to provide 1/9 of the overall mobile home court area as parks open space or common area. This subdivider is proposing well in excess of 1/9 of the area to be used as common area. Common Area 1, which is the area located above the drain field over to the west of the property, is proposed to be meeting the design standards for active recreation area. Staff is recommending a condition that be graded out to a grade of 3% or less so that people can use it for active recreation if kids wanted to go have a ball game or something over there. The rest of the area shown in green will also be common area, so the residents of this mobile home court will have pretty easy access to move about as they please throughout there, as it's all functions as somewhat a shared space other than the small area right around their home where it would be a little more private in nature. However, it wouldn't be fenced or necessarily delineated in any fashion. Let's see. This property is in the Bonner School District. Negative impacts to the school district have not been anticipated. It's reported that there'll be approximately 12.5 school-age children that could result from this subdivision. in which the school district we feel could handle that. They didn't provide any comments. Missoula Rural Fire District will serve this property. A hydrant and a cistern are the chosen water supply for fire suppression. It's not indicated on the plan. They will have to work with the Missoula Rural Fire District to come up with a location and a suitable cistern to support that development there. So that's a condition of approval, that needs to be reviewed and approved and installed prior to final plat there. And police protection and emergency services will be available in a manner consistent with this location and the nearest responder. Looking at the natural environment, wildlife, and wildlife habitat, we can see that concerns over the impact here have not been identified or are not anticipated. The comments that came back didn't shed light on any major concerns in terms of species of concern or habitat areas. We feel this is primarily due to the surrounding residential development, the close proximity to the major transportation corridors of Highway 200 and Interstate 90, as well as a lot of development across the river there. So there are some additional findings on that in the staff report, but we'll keep moving over that fairly quickly as that hasn't really come up much. The layout on the subdivision has been designed to maintain as many of the existing mature trees as possible. They are trying to keep a tight development footprint in there to the extent that they can to not cut down some of those trees. Looking at public health and safety, we are out of any mapped floodplain area on this property. We're pretty high up on a bench here. If you've been out there, it does drop off quite a ways down to the Clark Fork River. Property is within the air stagnation zone. New roads do need to be paved. There is some language and things in the covenants about stoves, and there's some slight tweaks to language in there. Nothing out of the ordinary, though. There's no slopes over 25% or any other hazard areas identified on this property. And any other health and safety concerns have not been identified and are not anticipated at this time. When we look to compliance with survey requirements, they will need to file this as essentially a final plan. They've submitted the preliminary plan, which gives us what we need in terms of showing the units and necessary infrastructure on the property. Subdivision regulations and review procedures. There is a special section in Chapter 4 of the subdivision regulations on mobile home courts that establish some standards which are different from subdivisions. They do have some setback requirements, visual screening, and pad site requirements for the mobile homes. Staff has found that they meet those requirements, or there's some minor conditions that have been added to address any slight tweaks that need to happen there. They provided the necessary provision of easements for utilities. All of these mobile homes will be within essentially one property. There is an existing 15-foot wide sewer line easement should sewer ever come out here. 2 properties to the south of the subdivision. They're proposing to relocate that and increase it to a 20-foot wide easement to come into compliance with subdivision regulations today. And we find that they do have legal and physical access at 2 different points with proposed Road A, that's to Highway 200 as well as Tamarack Road. And then Pine Grove Lane also makes that exit out to Tamarack Road as well. So that's the subdivision plan as a whole. I know most of the other shots have kind of cut it in ways, but that's what we'd be looking at on the just under 13 acres. Staff's recommendations here, as found in the staff report. The only tweak to the language on the screen is the staff report was written prior to the planning board, so it says that they'd be making recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. In this case, they're just worded as your motions would read on the screen. The first one is to relieve the applicant from that 7-foot boulevard between the sidewalk and vehicular traveled way of Road A. Staff's recommending that that be approved, subject to one condition. That condition is raising the grade 6 inches. That condition's found in your staff report with the variance findings. However, it was not included in the master list of conditions. So if you choose to adopt that, we would have to make a motion to add that in to the master list of conditions so that it's reflected in there. Looking at the variance request to relieve the applicant from constructing the pedestrian trail along Highway 200, staff is recommending denial of this request based on the findings of fact in the staff report. Looking at the variance for the improvements to Pine Grove Lane, which would allow it to be a 20-foot wide road as opposed to the 24-foot 20-foot wide requirement. Staff is recommending approval. And staff is also recommending approval of the Woody Mountain Court subdivision, subject to the conditions found in the staff report. As mentioned, this project did go in front of the planning board, and the planning board did make a few recommendations and changes to this subdivision at the public hearing back in July. The planning board minutes, as well as the planning board recap that staff provided to you, summarizes it and gives the full context of the dialogue that happened there. In summary of that hearing, planning board was in favor of the denial of the variance request, which would ensure the construction of that trail along the frontage of the subdivision. Planning board recommended that Road A be reduced to 20 feet in width as opposed to the 24 feet in width required by subdivision regulations, and that they be allowed to reduce the pedestrian trail to 4 feet in width and allow it to be at grade with the 20-foot wide roadway surface. Those two measurements are reflected on this diagram that I have on this screen here. Territorial Landworks put this together after our request after the planning board hearing, just to show how the 20-foot wide road and 4-foot wide trail would lay out on the ground there. So there has been some thought behind how that would lay out based on planning board's recommendations. The planning board also recommended approval of the subdivision. Here's the full text that you find in the planning board recap, as well as derived from the minutes from the planning board. The changes that planning board requested are underlined here. So as you can see, on the first variance request, they added the language to allow the reduction to the 4-foot wide sidewalk, as well as elimination of the boulevard. On the second variance request, they left it as staff recommended, and that was for the denial. On the third variance request, they went along with staff's recommendation for approval of that reduction in the road standard. They added a new variance request, which would be variance request number 4 there, and that would allow Road A to be reduced to 20 feet in width, and they recommended approval of that. And then they also recommended approval of the subdivision. They did make changes to 2 conditions of approval as staff had them recommended. The conditions, as they amended them, are underlined again here. They wanted to add language to the RSID/SID waiver statement on the plan to include a municipal sewer system if it ever were to be available to this property. That they've essentially waived the right to protest the RSID or SID. And they also added a condition that the 4-foot wide pedestrian trail that was going to be constructed at grade be delineated with a stripe or some other appropriate method to create at least some sort of visual delineation between what is the trail and what is the road. That concludes my staff report and the summary of the planning board recommendations. I'm happy to go over any of it. I know some of those planning board recommendations got maybe a little confusing, so.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Curtis.
So Casey, did the planning board come up with findings of fact, conclusions of law to support the changes that they made about the 4-foot sidewalk and the 20-foot road?
It was all based on the deliberations that they had at the hearing. They did not specifically go through the subdivision regulation variance criteria like staff has in the staff report for the variance requests and noted it one by one. We tried to, drive the best findings out of the testimony that we could, but it's not written up in a formal way by any means.
And then the one other question is in regard to the addition of RSID waiver for municipal sewer system. I believe that the health regs currently would take care of that anyway,
Yeah, I believe that,
especially since it's one lot.
yeah, health regulations would pick that up. We did not have a representative of the health department available at planning board to confirm that. And there was some discussion about the importance of those connections should they become available. They certainly wanted to make it known that they would like to see some sort of a municipal system out in the area. And without knowing truly which regulation it was through the health department that would trigger them to make that connection. They felt that by adding this statement, it would help cover it in the case that municipal sewer was available.
Okay. Would the applicant or applicant's representative like to present?
Yes. Paul Forsting, Territorial Land Works. Let me.
You want the mouse or?
Okay. Maybe you could find it for me.
Sure, yeah.
Going to be gentle, I think. That always happens. I'm sorry. I think we skipped the first slide, but we'll just skip the first slide. Not that important.
There it is.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, it's back. I'm Paul Forsting, Territorial Land Works. I'm here today with Bob Greil and Bob's brother, Bob's wife, and maybe even another, and a son. So we got the Greil family here with me today. Here on the photo I've got up here is a picture of Newcastle Court. Newcastle Court is a mobile home court just to the east of this project that Bob and his brother they own and maintain it. And so when Bob came to our office to say, hey, let's seek reapproval of our mobile home court, he said, hey, Newcastle works really well, and we want to do as much as we can to emulate that. And so we said, okay, well, let's look at the subregs, and we have a combination of what worked well and what we think the regulations will allow us to do.
So Paul, can I interrupt?
Yeah, absolutely.
How wide is that road right there? Just-
24 feet total.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. And I do have a little bit more of that in the application, but maybe I'll take a step back and just say, hey, mobile homes are an interesting type of project. We've had a lot of interest, at least at our office. Folks come in and say, hey, I want to do a mobile home court. Over the last 10 years, I've had quite a few. This is the only project I've ever worked on. I'm not sure how many the county has seen. Probably not a lot, I'm guessing, because I don't know. Not many, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. I don't think the city permits them anymore. I'm not sure they're even allowed there. Maybe they do, but I certainly haven't seen any there. With land value being where it's at, you really see a lot of mobile home courts being taken out. Some of these older ones, they're being removed, and that housing option for some of our residents here in the area, it's being eliminated, and there's some type of multifamily or single family going in there. The reason you don't see them is the whole evaluation of land, infrastructure. At the end of the day, it doesn't make a very enticing project for somebody to pursue. In this case, I think we have the right combination of Bob, who owns the land, and he's ready to make this application on it. And then he's also got examples. He's done mobile homes before. He's passionate about it. He's passionate about the area, and he thinks it's a good project. And so we've got the right combination of somebody willing to invest and to create this outcome, to create what I've heard. I heard a podcast, and they said it was America's truly only privately funded housing option, affordable housing option, that is. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's not true, but it's, when we look at what we're trying to do here, Bob comes and he's going to get rent from these, and he's going to get rent somewhere between $250 and $400. That's what he expects to get after all of this infrastructure goes in. We're going to put a level 2 wastewater system in here. We've got a public water supply system going in here. We've got, we're going to put a brand new road in. We're going to make improvements to the park area. And at the end of the day, he's going to fund all that, and he's going to get that paid back to him in I guess, pretty modest rents. And he's willing to do that. He thinks he's got the right combination. And so I'm not sure we'll see many more come forward, but I am excited about this one, and I'm pleased that not only am I excited about it, but Bob's experience with Newcastle Court does kind of, I guess, show you as best as we can what we're trying to create. And so I don't know if anybody made it out to Newcastle Court. I did bring some pictures of it. Here's what the court looks like on paper or from the aerial. You can see we've got the same kind of concept here with a road going through it, a 24-foot road, and then we have these little small roads, I guess they're called by the regulations, providing access to the back lots. And so that's exactly what our project does. It's got that road and then these smaller roads leading off to it. It creates for an interesting design, as Bob will tell you, that that you can certainly get more units in a row, stacking them like that. But that creates a much less interesting neighborhood. when we look at these, when we look at the actual road here, this is that front picture again. You can see there's no fences. There's nobody parking on the road here. People have carports. Can't really see that from this picture, but folks are allowed to build carports, and those carports can provide for an extra 2 parking spaces. We're providing 2 parking spaces for every unit, and then the carport itself would provide an extra 2 parking spaces if folks build those carports. And so Bob's seen a lot of success
Paul,
with that. Yep.
Paul or Bob, when was Newcastle developed? What year, roughly?
Yeah, it actually got built in 2000, 99 to 2000.
99 to 2000, yeah.
So just so I don't forget this question later, so I'm not seeing any sidewalks here. I see a 24-foot road.
Correct.
Did it not need to be built with urban standards in mind, or was there a variance?
Well, urban standards are a new term within the subdivision regulations, but there was a 4-foot walkway as part of this road. It's
Okay.
essentially what the planning board ended up with is what, in one version, same width, same concept here. There's just no stripe here anymore.
Okay, thank you.
The stripe's going to be out there. It just got.
Do you want to come up to the mic,
Yeah,
Bob?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Bob Greil with the Greil Development. That will have a stripe again on the left. That just got refogged. We just got done relaying that overlay on that, so we haven't got the stripers out there. But it'll be on, if you're on viewing the picture, our left looking at it, that's where the stripe goes, is along that side of the street on that end.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
You bet.
Sorry to derail you, Paul.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Bob will come up and I think he's got maybe more interesting stuff than me to say, but he'll be here to say it. And so when we talk about limited common area, what is that? That's the green space in front of everybody's house. There's not, if people have yards, but they're all part of a bigger common space network. And so we did show that here. We have, I guess, this is what you'd call as your park, I guess. The whole area can act as a park, but this is the park. There'll be a sign here. That's something Bob and I talked about. And I think as a kid, if there was a sign, I was going to play in there. But when you see these little parks around with no sign in it, who knows what they're for, or who owns it, or whatnot. And so there will be a sign in there that'll lure folks in. We do have our wastewater system in here. It's going to be a level 2 wastewater system, as I mentioned. It's likely going to be a limonite system. They use a type of media that allows them to do a nitrogen reduction, which is good and it's important and it's needed here. And so it's not a standard system. It's that next step up, which DEQ classifies as a level 2 system, and it'll have a discharge permit. So for every 5 years from here on out, that system's performance will be monitored. Well, it'll be monitored every quarter, or maybe even monthly, and provided to the state. But every 5 years, it'll be reassessed. It'll be, and it's a tough thing for systems to have those for the life of them. There's fees and additional restrictions that can be imposed on it, but it does put a permanent guarantee in that this sewer system will be maintained and operated as required, and it's treating as required. So when we look at it, this is Newcastle Court's drain field, and anytime we have a drain field in a park area, it seems to come up, is that a good place for it? So drain fields in a park. Well, most folks outside of the city have a backyard and their drain field's in it, and off the swing set, it's a nice little flat area. So it's generally fine to be there. This is what Newcastle's looks like, aside from maybe a couple weeds here or there. It looks pretty fine. This is one for Mountain Meadows. This is in Florence in Ravalli County. All that green space is their parks, and all of that is a mix of drain field, and you can actually see the tanks there. That's what a subsurface system looks like there. And then that whole green space is where the drain field is. And so it's, and that's a system we designed and had been operating for a long time. It's right off the highway there and just past Florence. And yeah, it does great. And I think, it doesn't impede anybody from using it at all. The last one I'll show you here is Peaks. This is what Peaks drain field looks like. It's in between the buildings there. And it's just a nice green space. So that's generally what our drain field will look like. And yeah, so this is the planning board's exhibit, or the exhibit we created after the planning board, showing what the planning board had approved for our internal trail system. Casey had showed you this. This is something the planning board decided to do after our deliberations regarding the entire project. It made sense to Bob. This is what Bob originally was hoping to accomplish when he came to our office with, saying, hey, match Newcastle. I guess I missed the mark by not asking for a variance to have it because it was, the planning board thought it was a good alternative. We certainly appreciate that and it helps accomplish our goals. And so this is, we appreciated their approval and we appreciated their thought process behind what they recommended for our road. This is Spurgeon Ranch Road. This is a striped at grade road and trail in action. This is basically what we're looking to. This is what we originally had put in the application, a 24-foot road. I assume this is maybe even a little less thin than that, and an 8-foot trail, all at the same grade. And so Spurgeon Roads Trail, you can see it there. It's not raised at all. This is part of the county's inventory of roads. This ties into the trail on Clements here. The trail on Clements that leads all the way to south. This is where all the kids walk on their way to the target range school. I think the speed's 35 on that. I used to live right out on Clements for a couple years. My daughter used to use it quite a bit. I used it. I didn't see any problems with it. Our road our road and trail is proposed to be at grade, and it'll be at a much slower speed than what you see here. And you've also got North Avenue that uses the same concept here. We've actually got 4 people in that picture using it, which is, I just pulled those off of Google Earth, whatever, but that's a good one, 4 people. On the trail there. People don't necessarily park in them. They do sometimes, but we'll put no parking signs up, and so that it can, but you don't see them too often. I think people generally respect them if they're striped correctly, and and Bob has the ability to enforce the no parking and such. And so when we talk about concerns with people parking in the striped area, yes, there's potential for people doing that, but Bob has the ability here to, 1, sign it so nobody does, and then 2, to keep them out. And we don't see that in all of these. We'd much prefer an at-grade sidewalk than one that's raised up. Bob and his brother do the maintenance out there and for moving snow and that's going to be an important consideration. It's pretty easy to do it at grade. It's pretty easy to maintain it. It's pretty easy to put the stripe on there. But when you add a little grade, it just complicates it. It adds to cost. It makes it a little harder to maintain. And we think it's functionally can act just as good with this type of design here we see in some of the target ranges trail system. We've asked for the variance along the frontage road. It's that total trail length would be 1/3 of a mile at 1,761 feet. Bob worked quite a bit over the last couple years trying to work with the community, work with the county, work with folks on building a trail out here. And unfortunately, the process was started and they had some momentum, and then it was ultimately turned down or the plan stopped because further west of here, you get to that Marshall Canyon Road grade, and it's just difficult, and they couldn't come up with a solution for it. And so they said, hey, we're just going to stop where we stop. That leaves you right at Bob's property. He was excited to see if it was going to go somewhere he would like it to connect. But they said, hey, not many users in this area, and we've got this limited area for a trail, which I'll show you here. This is the aerial of it, and you can see it. Bob's project here is highlighted, and directly to the west of that is another court that Bob owns. I think it's aptly named Greil Court right there. It's adjacent to our property. We feel that those folks in that property they'll be adjacent to our park, and so they can just mosey through the park. They already do. If you look from here, you can actually see there's an existing road grade in that park there. You can kind of see it going through there. Folks use it as a gravel road or a gravel trail, excuse me, not a road, but they use it. It's there. And then as we go further west, it gets pretty limited. And you can actually see here, this is what happens with the trail, and it just really kind of bogs down here. And so it's, something that anytime you're building the trail, you'd like it to go somewhere, and we're not sure if it will go anywhere, if it goes past this, goes through our site. We're hoping that you're just willing to talk to us about what we have for options with that trail. This is where the trail would have to go through. There is some existing vegetation there. We think it's a nice amenity to have the vegetation there, and so we we'd like to keep it if possible. This, yeah, absolutely. I think I can actually.
So do you know, just from that photo, where the highway right-of-way currently goes? How far into the trees there?
I don't know, and yeah, Bob, maybe you want to.
Yeah, come on up.
Roughly into the trees. Just the right on that edge of that tree, there's a sprint line that was laid, and that was laid in the highway right away, but right on the edge of it. So that tree that you see there and then that dark edge, that would be the end of the highway right away, right along that edge there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Paul Forsting. So, and yeah, I don't know exactly where it's at, but Bob does, but there is some, we put 25 feet as a right of way, or excuse me, as a trail option. And obviously Bob was excited to see it possibly come through. And now we're, I guess, here to talk to you about it. This is where our road will come in. It's already there. This is Pine Grove. This is the other, that was from the east side. This is the west side, and the trail would have to make its way through there. So as we look at it, I put this slide in here just to again talk about, to talk about this. There's that trail I mentioned, or the old road grade that goes through there that folks use it. Bob's court here is going to be attached to the park here. We have our road has a trail. Those folks could use that trail, go through our project, and make it to here. And the trail's right over here. Here's what that looks like. This is actually Bob's court here. And then, so this is the most western point in our project. And here's what that actually looks like here. And so, yeah, there's a kind of a existing option there. That'll all be park, and these folks will be able to use that park too. And so it'll be, it's going to serve both parks. This segment of trail in the park here is 548 feet. So that leaves, just around 1,200 feet of remaining here. Well, we're here to talk about it. The planning board denied our request for the trail, and so we understand that puts us in a difficult spot here today, but we did, option A for us would be no trail. That works best for our project, and we think it makes the most sense. Option B would be extending our existing internal trail with a trail from right here to tie in to it. So there's no required trail here. We're not proposing a trail here, but we would if that was a suitable option B. Again, folks, the limited number of folks who do live here are in Bob's court. They could walk through this existing path that they use already through the park. They could then access the on-site road trail path and use that, and then pick it up here. And we'd be willing to do an 8-foot trail there and tie in. So that'd be our preferred option. If there was a third option, if there was an option C here, it would be to just construct a trail along this segment here and then just leave the park without having to do it. It's an extra 548 feet. We feel like people can get through there already. There is, a form of a trail there. And so those are our three options with that. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave you here with the picture of it again, because I think it's, as all the other slides I showed you, this is probably just as important as any of them. Bob is going to get up and tell you a little bit of how he's managed his other courts and what his plans are for this one. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Greil.
Bob Greil, thank you for listening to my statement here. Just a slight history on why we're doing with the trailer parks. And as Paul mentioned, that the financial aspect of building a trailer park isn't, which I'd say, optimum in the markets out there. But we are unique in two factors. One, we do own the properties, and they've been in their family for a long time. And I'm not real interested in what the recoverable value of that property is at this stage. We live there. Those are our homes. On that previous pictures you saw, my son lives just to the south of where this park is. Or the new one we're planning on building. He's just south of that. My brother lives south in the larger road complex you saw. He lives there. I'm just down the street from that. Our family's been here for a long time, and that's our property, and that's what we're trying to build is a nice community property for people in our community. I was raised in Bonner, and our families have been there forever. My wife actually was a teacher at Bonner School. And so community is important to us. And we brought this, years ago, we brought Newcastle before the, at that time, Bonner Development Group. And Bruce Hall was in charge of that thing, and they walked in there. And at the same time, the bank had come in to try and get in our community, and we're trying to build our community up. And I brought in the idea of building another trailer park, and right away I was getting, oh, another trailer park, you know, and then there's a concept in everyone's mind of what a trailer park is, and it's usually a row of all these houses that have got a lot of police cars out in front, and dogs barking, and kids running, in a crazy place, and everybody says, geez, I don't want that in my community. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, we could develop these places and try and turn them into homes and that, and yet I look at who's in our community, and they can't afford these places. And I'm trying to build something nice for our community. That's what we do. Yes, we want to make a profit on it in the end. Let me tell you, this is a long-term retrieval. It really is. Because the other factor, not only we own the property, we also have a road construction company. That's what we do for our main living, is we do it. So we have equipment, and Tom and I run them. I can't afford to put laborers or people that I would hire to build this court to make it pay. We're going to do the work ourselves, because we have the equipment, and when you work for yourself, you can work pretty cheap sometimes. So that's what we do. That's how we built this. We spent 2 summers just working on building this place and trying to do it. Everything in there, other than the paving, was our development. We built it. And we went back to the West Coast. We went to Bend, Oregon to look around. I'd heard stories about trailer parks that were not your typical one. And we ran into some that started looking like this, and they were beautiful. And I thought, beautiful trees, lawns manicured, acreage that people had access. They were happy when we'd stand and talk to them. They were living there. A lot of them had lived there all their lives. They never wanted to leave. Their homes were beautiful. And they were turned like a home sits in a normal lot. They were turned. Well, you don't utilize your space well doing that, but it makes a home. A home. You come in at night and you look at your place and you say, there's where I live. I like where I live. And, you know, these folks right here in this picture, they live right on the river. The common area that you saw earlier on the drain field isn't really used that much, because on this court in particular, we've got a 50-foot to 75-foot setback from the river. That's our common area. Those folks go out in the evenings, and they got park benches out there, and they sit and they rock and they watch the sky and the river go by and the floaters, and they love what they have there. We're trying to emulate that. Now, we're not right on the river on this one, so we've got a beautiful, beautiful acreage right there. That big field that's going to be the drain field is right next to Tom's place. He keeps it up all the time. He's mowed it, and his daughter takes care of it. So we've got a nice area for these folks. And our little court that actually my father built years ago is a little more of the old standard court. It was built back in 1968. And those folks have been there, most of them have been there their entire lives. So, and a few of them have gone on since then, you know, they've been there. But that's what they use. They walk through there and they use that property, and they come and use the other properties we have. We've never discouraged it. That's community. All right, that being said, that's what we're trying to focus on. We're trying to build this for our community so the people in our community can come out and live and afford what they've got, yet I want them in a pleasant place. And that's what we're trying to do on this. The whole idea on that road being 24 foot has worked out beautifully for us on this thing. And like I said, I apologize, but we did just do I always call it a fog coat, but it's an overlay when they seal coat the asphalt. So it hasn't had the stripe repainted yet on it, but that'll be done soon. The other thing on the trail, one of the things on the trail is that we were never against a trail going in out there. The thing of it is, I'm trying to keep it so it's affordable. I mean, there's 25 people in this court that are going to have to, or 25 homes, the people in that court are going to have to pay for that trail to go through. That's a pretty big burden when it goes on these folks. Anytime I can reduce asphalt and yet keep it, because like I said, I don't provide the asphalt. I got to sub that out. So I'm paying market prices for those things. Anytime I have to do that, that cost goes directly to those folks, and it just keeps upping and upping and upping their costs. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, it's not an excellent access for their folks anyway. Their home is right off these roads where we're going to have the parking area and their sidewalks, and that's where they're going to want to walk to go back and forth and out, and they'll run out to it. That being said, I did know that there was the regulation that on the trail. So what we've been doing for a couple of years is trying to see if we can get government assistance or a little bit of help from somebody to help us with this. We had Five Valley Land Trust worked on it, and the county was involved. MDOT was out there. We thought we had this thing maybe whipped. They had a good presentation. What ended up happening is what Paul said. They ran into that bottleneck down on the other end, and some of them wanted to go all the way. They wanted to try and tie up the entire East Missoula, trying to connect it all in one shot. I look back at it now, I know that was a mistake. We should have made application to just try to do our place. Anderson next to us was willing to donate property to get it down to that point. And we had that much. I think if we would have been able to supply that in there, I think it would have gone through and just said, we'll deal with that later. Let's take care of this group right here. That's what I was hoping for. I want to do that again. I would like to do it. But what I would like to do, I would like to say, here's the thing. If you folks would agree, I'm going to donate that 25-foot easement we need for that trail through there. I'm going to donate that easement, that whatever that is. I shouldn't give the numbers, I'm not for sure. But whatever that easement needs to be, I'm willing to donate in there in the stipulation that a trail will go through. And I'd like an opportunity to keep trying. That's what I want to do. I want to keep trying at this and get this thing through. I really think if we shorten this up, we can get it through. If I don't know. I just don't know if we're going to be able to make this whole thing work, adding that much cost to these folks. I mean, right now, Newcastle itself, most of the homes out in that community go about $250 to $280 a month. Some of the nicer courts that are back will get into the $300 to $320 range. We're at $355. I know Wheeler Village is at $400 now, which is now the Westview. It's what I call it Wheeler, but that was their old name, Westview. They're at $400 a month, and I don't want to go to $400. We're at $355, and I've held it there a long time. And I've been trying to hold it there, and I don't want to raise it if I can help it. Most of these folks are retired, fixed incomes, and most are and they're just doing all they can do to survive, like any of the rest of us. And if we don't need it, I don't want to raise it. But that's the stipulation. Right now, because of the new regs and everything we're sitting on, we're really talking about if we're going to hold that 350, 355 in Woody, because it's just getting to the point. And all once I'm looking here and saying, we're going to have to tack a third of a mile of trail onto these people. And there's 25 units. They're going to have to pay for this thing. I don't know if it's going to work. So if we can come up with some other solution, some other way to make it work, I want them accessing to it. I'd like them to be able to get to the trail. I use it. My wife uses it. Kids do. We're going to, it's a streetcar. It's the old trolley car I used to go through. And that's what our little dirt trail from that, they follow the old trolley car. That's what we use. If there's a way around it, I would like to see some effort put into doing it, that we could make it affordable and keep it that way. It'd be a shame not to let this thing go through. I've got so many people out there that have asked me, have you got it yet? Have you got it? And, they want to move in. They love this one and they want to move in there. And I want to provide it. So I guess that's my statement, folks.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Greil. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to comment on this proposed development? Okay. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Questions from the commission? And I guess I'll just kick it off by saying I did take a drive out to Newcastle the other night. I'd been out there before and drove out to refresh my memory, and it does seem as though the road configuration out there works for folks. The 24-foot width without any boulevard sidewalk or additional width. I saw folks utilizing the roadway when I was out there, and it appeared for that level of density fairly safe. How many units, mobile homes are at Newcastle? 24. Okay.
Bob Greil, yeah, there's 24 and this one would be 25.
Okay, so pretty comparable. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Cola.
I'm interested in that perspective, but when we go through the subdivision regulations, we decided that really there should be some sort of equity in the access to pedestrian facilities for all people, and I think it might be questionable if we start waiving the requirements for pedestrian facilities, especially in mobile home areas. I think that it sets a bad precedent and takes us steps backwards in where we have been trying to go. Although I also recognize that we're willing to reopen our subdivision regs and try to reduce road widths and things like that for sustainability purposes. But I am concerned about not having really adequate road width, because this is actually pretty dense. This is more dense than a lot of subdivisions in the county are, and there's really quite a bit of people that are going to be living there. So I worry about the road width not being adequate, and then also not having adequate pedestrian facilities. I'm not sure it's socially equitable.
So I guess just to further that, put that in terms of a question, Casey, what just review for us, what's the differentiation between the urban standards applying for this? Is it the geographic area where this is being proposed that is the trigger there, the density?
Sure. So this is located in the urban area per subdivision regulations. That's based largely off of the Missoula wastewater service area. It's found as Appendix A to the Missoula County subdivision regulations. So your standard map of the wastewater service area becomes the urban area for subdivision regulations. Then the standards for roads or trails is based off a unit count. Units or lots. If it was a single-family residential subdivision, it would be lots. In this case, it's units. So whether it was 25 single-family homes, each on their own lot, whatever that size may be, or 25 mobile homes within one lot, you have 25 units, those standards would be the same.
So if Newcastle was being proposed today, would I guess how would that play out differently than what we see on the ground there now?
I believe Newcastle is in the urban area. The map is fairly small on this paper copy I have, but if it is in fact in the urban area, it would be the exact same as what the applicant essentially originally proposed, and with the variances, of course, but as the regulations as I reported in the staff report. So the 8-foot wide trail along one side, a 24-foot wide no parking road. Per the regulations, there would be a 7-foot boulevard creating separation there. That's where the variance request that the applicant originally requested comes in.
Okay, thank you.
What if it was in Clinton?
If it was in the rural area, we would be subject to the rural standards, which, give me just a moment here.
So it's a function of the waste, at least one of the factors, it's a function of it being within the wastewater sewer service area? Is that what
Goes clear out to Bonner.
which will likely never have a municipal
So
city sewer?
The rural standards for a major subdivision are to include a trail on at least one side of all roads internal to the subdivision that's constructed pursuant to the standards in 3.4.9.4, which is our non-motorized standards, which takes you back to the unit count again. So essentially, it would be the same deal.
It would be the same,
Yes.
pretty much? Okay.
And I would also comment that our on-grade trails, we have lots of problems with those. And so there are several examples of them in the county, but especially the one on Clements. We do have significant problems, I feel, with on-grade trails. Raising them up, especially within a neighborhood, to more of a sidewalk type design is much superior to an on-grade.
Yeah, Clemens is probably not a great example in that
Of anything.
we frequently get folks complaining about people parking in that trail right across the street from the trough. But I
The
think,
unique thing, I think, though, in these two is that they're not, a connecting road that connects, North Avenue to South Avenue or anything like that. The other is because they're private, he has way more control than we do. He doesn't have to call the sheriff. He can go out there and say, you pay your rent here, I own the land. Don't do that. So I think there is a little bit of difference, and which is good, really. And it'll be slower traffic just because of the layout.
Yeah, I was thinking more of safety purposes, not just parking on the trail, but being on grade is sometimes considered less safe. But
so would either Paul or Bob want to address, I think maybe one of you mentioned it the other day that you did some informal survey of folks in Newcastle as far as how they find the functionality of the street and pedestrian access.
Yes, Dave, the Bob Greil again. I did. I contacted some of the residents, mostly the ones that are out walking around. That's what I just went and saw them and spent a little time with them and asked them, told them what we were doing on this one and what the regulations were saying on that. And when I mentioned about the raised sidewalk situation, I mean, I don't want to name names, but the fellow to the right lives right across from my daughter. My daughter actually lives in this park also. He said, "Oh my God, no." He says, "What would I do?" He says, "I'm walking with a cane. In the wintertime, I'll fall down if I fall off that 6-inch. I'm going to go over to see Jackie all the time. How am I coming back across? I mean, I got this. I've got a couple folks that are in wheelchairs. We've got lots of the walkers and the canes. I mean, that they don't want grade differentiations. A lot of their sidewalks and that have got handicap access inside. A lot of them put them inside their carports, and then they get in and out through those. They don't want those grade changes. They hate them because of that problem we're going to have. We're going to have a difficult time maintaining because that 6-inch raise is really difficult when you're snowplowing because I've got to get rid of snow in here. And if we don't have any way to get up on that sidewalk to get it into their yards, and you can't turn to do that, it's going to be very, very difficult to do it. So it really does put a bind on everybody. And most of these guys, they don't like that sometimes I'll leave maybe a quarter to a half inch of snow. I mean, these guys like their places. Let me tell you, they got their little snow blowers out there, and they're blowing and they're doing it, and they're walking out in the street right in front of their place because they'll make sure it gets a little lower than what I can get it at. So, I mean, it's really maintained well. They love their place, and they don't want the obstacles involved. The other thing that's going to happen, and especially on Woody, where that road is different, where that road layout is in there, if we start adding more width to those roads, we're going to be taking more big trees and a lot more area out. Right now, if you look in these pictures, they're in their yards. This place was totally covered with timber and undergrowth, and it was at the time, and we had a lot of transient life in there is what was going on in this place. And it took a lot to maintain that. If you ever want a challenge, try putting septic and water and power in through all these trees and around these homes so they're still usable. That's what kind of what I want to say. That's the type of concern we have when we try to build this. I want these beautiful when we're done. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Curtis. The fact that it's inside the court, we maintain, and we've got covenants, and we maintain those covenants. To start with, when you start a court, you have a lot of the people that start to abuse them. You go in there and you see them right away, you explain things, you get straightened out. After a while, you don't have the abuses, and it isn't so much because they're afraid of you, but it's because their neighbors start calling them. And they say, what are you doing? You're not allowed to park out there. They take care, they monitor this. I don't have to do an awful lot in policing. I don't do it. They take care of their own place. They're proud of it, and they maintain it. And I'm just telling you right now, to put that boulevard in there, it's going to be a tricky factor because they just did not want it. That's what I gathered from everyone in there. If that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
And it sounds like it's recommended that we allow the getting rid of the boulevard, but with the condition that we raise the
Yes.
grade.
That was staff's recommendation.
That was not planning board's recommendation, though. They wanted it at grade.
And only 4 feet.
At grade, 4 feet in width as opposed to 8 feet as proposed, conforming with the regulations and delineated with a stripe.
Okay.
So I guess one of my concerns about what planning board chose to do is creating variances that were not proposed by applicants, and then also with really no substantive conclusions of law or findings of fact as to why that variance should exist. And I feel that we could get into the thing where people bring in subdivisions and we just willy-nilly decide different road widths for everything. I think when people are going to vary from the regulations that we've recently adopted, there have to be pretty strong evidence that there is a reason that they should be able to vary, not just they want to and they used to be able to 20 years ago when they built this one. I think it's a slippery slope to start just willy-nilly altering things out of our regulations. And like I said, we're willing to look at those and change road widths maybe in the future. But I think currently it's important to really be pretty judicious with variances.
Jean?
I have a couple questions. So one, Casey, as you said, mobile home parks are in subdivision regulations, and there isn't any differentiation in regard to the need for road width and sidewalks, right?
Not between a mobile home court and a standard subdivision, no.
So my one question to the Griles, because you are in this business, if the commission decided to go forward and with the planning board's recommendations to more mirror what you have here at Newcastle, it's going to be less money, it's going to be less work, it's going to lose less trees, all those things. So I get what you're trying to do in keeping the cost down for folks who are going to rent these lots. But would that would offset some of the cost of the trail along 200, which is really, those off-site trails are partly for the folks that live where you are, but they're also just partly your contribution to the community as a whole, which I understand you've supported, but cost-wise, what does it cost to build a trail for a half a mile, I guess?
Mr. Greil.
Bob Greil. The cost on a half-mile trail, just ballparking it because we don't have anything set in stone on it, it's going to be probably about $50,000 to set that in there. And because of the grade changes that are involved with it, if you remember back on that picture, we're not using highway right-of-way, which is straight and flat along there. We're actually going up and down and swirling around and trying to get through. That background right against the road on it actually was borrow pit that they had used for highway development and to build the trolley car rail through there. So it's got a lot of variations right along that edge, and that cost is high. The other half of it, by decreasing that, and I would have gone with this originally, but they mentioned, that, well, we can't, they've changed the rules, and I said, well, let's see what we can go through. I don't know. I don't know where we're going to end up in the cost in this thing. But the cost on my end, it isn't going to affect me. It's what's going to happen to the folks in there. If we drop the road down, and we could narrow the road down and get it to that workable situation, and you guys are really set on the trail part, I can see where we could maybe put the trail out in the front up to Pine Grove to counter. So in other words, we're taking the 8-foot strip off the road, and we take the 8-foot and we put it out there in lieu of it being on the road, we put it on the trail. So now I got a little dirt work, but that's me. I can do the dirt work. It's that extra thread. I'd be willing to, I'm not saying willing, but I'm saying that would be something, I would say we may be able to get that to fit in there. And not worry about taking it from Pine Grove all the way down the rest of the way, where it's really not benefiting anybody at this stage, because I've already got a trail in for my other folks. They use that all the time. They're not going to walk out to the highway and come down. They're just not. And there isn't any other development down that way at this stage. But I would still, even if that was all the further we went, I would still grant the easement from Pine Grove down to that other properties. And I'm willing to grant the easement in front of my other court to get, because I do think in the end, someday we're going to have that, and I want to have it. I think it's a good thing. And my neighbor, who I thought would never go along with me on that, I know him, and I thought I think we're dead end here. And by gosh, if we didn't talk him into agreeing to do that, and I think we can. And I think that, like I said, I think there's funding out there for it. But I'd like to dip into the big pool where everybody's getting involved with this, and not just these 25 people that just really want to live in this place. And I'd like to have access up there, but I could see us doing that, if that would make sense.
So, Mr. Greil, just to make sure this is clear and on the record, and this is totally hypothetical since we haven't gotten into any motions yet, but if we were not to require the trail along Highway 200, you would be willing to grant an easement across the frontage there of the entire tract?
Yeah, absolutely. From along our property all the way through there.
For a future trail?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Cola.
In the recent application that we put in for the trail that did go around that curve, was this property included? It was.
It connected back to Tamarack.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, we committed county funds to match a grant if we got it from MDT, and we did not, but we still have those county funds committed for this trail, and so usually I would not entertain not putting in the trail, but this was already part of a trail that we had committed to funding for the general public good, because we do believe that trail will eventually be a commuter trail all the way into Missoula. And so could we maybe have more flexibility here since the county has committed funds, or could we have a matching grant to cover some of the cost of it? Granted, it would be nice if developers would just put in trails, but it's one that we've already been working on putting in with public dollars anyways, so.
Commissioner Curtis.
And we would also now have the committed on paper easement drawn, so that to me would count too towards the match.
And Casey, go ahead and answer. And I have an additional question of whether this would be, if we did something along those lines, would that be a condition of approval to grant an easement?
Sure. I was going to first say the 25-foot access easement is already shown on the preliminary plan, so that's the applicant's already proposed that. That's, set in stone essentially with what we're reviewing here today. In order to relieve them from constructing the trail with this application, you would essentially be approving the applicant's variance request that they made from the get-go. That was one of the original variance requests. As noted, staff recommended denial of it. So
Okay, Mr. Mr. Greil, come on up.
I'm Bob Greil. I just wanted to clarify, when I mentioned that easement, I'm not stopping at Woody Mountain. What I'm saying about that, I'd be willing to take it through the other park also, the little court there, too, so it goes to the end of our properties up there.
Thanks. And that is included in there also, Casey.
that is not, because it was not brought up in the application. This application focuses on Woody Mountain Court, not Greil Court, which is adjacent. So
Okay.
there would have to be some condition of approval to file some sort of an easement document, because we're not altering that. Not that that was on a plan necessarily if it was done in 68 or whatever the case was, but since we're not looking at that with this request, it would have to be some alternate method of guarantee.
Outside of this review process, or as a condition of approval?
I suppose a condition of approval could cover it.
It could also just be a good faith effort that he does on his own.
Yeah, I mean, we're stretching a little bit here onto adjacent property, but
That would be
I mean-
considered an off-site.
yeah, it'd be like an off-site mitigation of the impact of not having the trail, but at least he's giving the ability to continue it.
Paul?
Yeah, we would take it as a condition of approval, absolutely. That I think that's the appropriate spot for it, would be a condition of approval that we establish that separate easement as part of the final plan application.
Okay. Cola?
Can we condition off-site things if the applicants agree to it, or is it still something that is best not done within our authority?
I think it can be done. There could be off-site mitigation. I know it's happened before in the past on things like agricultural aspects. So suppose the trail, you'd be making the findings really that you're mitigating, not having the trail, but you're offering up the ability for additional connection maybe.
Casey, could you pull up the plat onto the screen?
Sure. Let me grab the mouse real quick.
So one thing that you mentioned, Paul, and that addresses a concern that I would have would be along Tamarack. If folks from the mobile home court wanted to access the existing trail to the east, I think you called it option B, perhaps. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? What that would look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in absence of the exhibit that had the little arrow on it, it would be from our trail, right there. Yep, Casey's got it, from right there to that intersection with Tamarack and the highway, and that's where the trail dead ends. And so we'd be willing to make that connection, even a crossing, I guess, which would be, whatever that means. But
So one potential compromise would be developing a condition of approval that would grant an easement across the entire northern portion of the lot and on the adjoining property, and creating a small trail connection to the north along Tamarack.
yes, we'd be fine with that.
I would just like to note that the easement's already there, so it doesn't necessarily have to be explicitly conditioned. It's part of the plan that's proposed. You don't have to condition for them to do every little item on there. I noted when Paul was mentioning you could have a connection through here up to Tamarack, that this isn't platted or dedicated as any sort of an easement or a right-of-way through there. So you run into the issue of public really don't have the right to go through. I mean, they may very well let them, but it's not explicitly stated anywhere that that's a public access all the way through the center of this mobile home court. So it's worth considering that aspect.
as soon as you build one, everybody thinks they can go on it, and it isn't necessarily a public, it's not a public
Yeah.
right-of-way.
Okay, is it working now? Okay, it's working now. Yeah, I wasn't contemplating that at some future date that if there was a trail connection farther to the west, that it would then loop down through the subdivision, then come back up to the existing trail. But this would be more creating safety for the folks who live there to access the existing trail to. Okay, we're changing mics here. Okay, additional questions from the commission before we start into the meat of motions.
It sounds like if we agree that the 25-foot easement for the trail, especially if we add that extra mitigation to extend that 25-foot easement through Greil Court, I guess we'd add that somewhere, but then variance number 2 we'd approve if we wanted to go that way, right? So I guess the other question then is in regard to the planning board's 20 feet with 4-foot trail at grade or 24 foot with 8 foot. Having dealt with my mom's physical abilities the last couple of years, I really do get that accessibility issue. Because I even notice it when like if you drive up downtown here and you need to get out of the car, or even at the hospital, you go to the hospital to pick them up. You drive up to a curb that's 6 inches higher than the car, and then you try to figure out where the heck do their feet go as they get in and out without falling down. So, I mean, it is a big issue. You either get super, super close, or you go back far enough so that they step off here and then they step in there. So, and then we see it all the time with the maintenance of trails. It is an issue, and it's much easier if you can use the same piece of equipment to clear the trail as you can to clear the road, rather than having to have another piece of equipment that clears the trail. So whatever number we come up with, I would be in favor of the at grade in this case, because it's not Clements Road, it's not 3rd Street. It is a short street that has the ability for private control rather than having to call a deputy.
So what's our preference? Would it be easiest just to go through the motions and then we can debate or discuss those additionally at that time?
Yeah, probably take a stab at, one variance at a time, and then ultimately there's the main motion and the master list of conditions associated with all of it.
And work off staff recommendation or planning board's recommendations?
It sounds like, from what I've been hearing, maybe a mix of the two. So,
Oh,
I mean,
First
that,
one is this issue.
okay.
yeah.
So shall we begin with variance request number 1?
I think it's easiest to work off planning boards, don't you? And then we
Well,
can say
well,
yes or no.
staff's text is on the planning boards, correct? It's either struck through or additions or
Yeah,
there.
planning board primarily just added to.
Okay, why don't you
so
just pull that up and we can,
that would be these 5 motions here.
okay, thank you.
I guess my comment, I get the accessibility issue too, but the urban solution to grade differences is not to not have sidewalks. That's not how society has dealt with that problem. Not that that's wrong, but I don't think it makes good sense. Also, 4 feet is not much. I have a hard time keeping my double stroller on 4 feet and having kids running around. And that's also why I think above grade is better for sidewalks, is because I have young children, and at grade with a fog line is not a safe delineation for children who will run out into the street with that. So I still disagree with. I agree with staff's recommendation that the condition should be that they have to raise the grade. And I think that the road should have to be 24 feet wide.
So would 6 feet at grade be?
You guys can just vote for it and I'll vote against it. That's the easiest way to do it.
Well, and again, I guess I see both sides of the argument here, in that what I saw out at Newcastle seems to be working. I get the argument as far as at grade. This is still a fair, I mean, it's a private road. That's a differentiation between, and I think a case can be made that that is different than, in this case, than other public road facilities that we would normally require. But I also get that 4 feet is narrow, and vehicles are traveling through there, although not many, I suspect. Casey.
I could just add that we do have Garrick Swanson with Parks, Trails, and Open Lands here. If there is any questions on, what's appropriate for trails, he may be able to shed some light on it. Staff obviously took what's recommended in the subdivision regulations, and Planning Board came up with 4 feet, which is half of that. So if there is additional questions, just know that he is here and willing to speak to trail widths if you have any inclination in that regard.
Okay, thanks.
And I know that it's in the report here somewhere, but what is the standard for trip generation per household average? Is it 8 or 10 trips per day,
I'd
something
have
like that?
to go back into their application here to see what it is. I forget right offhand.
Isn't
Unless
it generally,
Paul
Paul
might know.
probably knows.
Yeah, it's generally 8, but yeah, you see 10 some places. I certainly don't make that many trips, but that's the standard, so.
Okay, so that'd be a couple hundred trips a day.
And that was Paul Forstein speaking?
Paul Forstein, yep.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe this is a question for Jean. No one here is here from the health department, but the project that got done with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, looking at poor neighborhoods and the economics and the economic impacts and social justice, essentially, as far as infrastructure goes. And I wonder how that plays into this conversation, because that's another thing, is I feel like we're reducing infrastructure standards for affordable housing units when the goal is for the people who don't have as much money to still have access to infrastructure that is equal to the infrastructure everyone else has access to.
Right, and I would agree that that's what the study says. I'm not sure if it went into the detail of the exact type of infrastructure, and I mean, in my mind, that's why I asked the question about what if this was Clinton, and it sounds like it'd be the same, because I always look at urban and rural as just a little bit different, not for social equity things, but just in because of the reduction in the amount of traffic. But
And
I grew up in the sticks, so you went to town twice a month, not 10 times a day. So, but people, it's just changed.
And I was just going to note, after reading through them a little bit more, sorry I didn't have a chance to jump back in on that. The way it's worded with urban and rural, and my apologies, was that urban requires the boulevard separation and the 8-foot trail, whereas the rural would require the 8-foot trail. Subdivision regulations don't require the grade break. That was a recommended condition for safety when you're eliminating the boulevard, but the rural standards don't have that boulevard, is my second reading of that regulation. And I apologize for that statement earlier if it was misleading. Same width, though.
Mr. Worley, come on up.
Tim Worley with CAPS. I just want to mention on the offsite easement, something to be aware of is that you probably should demonstrate some sort of nexus between the needs of the mobile home court and the easement requirement itself, just legally for it to be a sound, if you go that direction of just requiring the easement and including the offsite component, probably should come up with some findings about how it serves this mobile home court and its residents. And then on any new variances, like dealing with the interior roadway, if you decide to go less than 24 feet or some alternative on the walkway on the interior, you probably should come up with variance findings out of section 5.10, and I can direct you to what those include. It includes undue hardship, unique conditions. The variance will not cause an increase in public costs, et cetera. And I can hand you sections out of the regs. It just, since these weren't variances in the application itself, it's probably appropriate to cite to the findings in the regs as far as what constitutes an appropriate variance.
Do you have that page you could bring up?
Indeed, I do. It's actually 2 pages.
In the regulations, right?
Correct. We might be able to pull it up actually on the web too, if that's.
So Tim, while you're there, then just to clarify what Casey just said, so in urban standards, you have the road width, you have a boulevard, you have the sidewalk. So 24, 7-foot boulevard, 8-foot sidewalk. That's so you can pass each other with two bikes or 2 strollers. The boulevard is a safety feature because in urban, you're assuming more traffic, I'm guessing.
That's right.
So because the boulevard was going to be missing, staff recommended that
The
raising
grade
up. So at
separation.
least you
Yeah,
felt your tire hit it before you got on the sidewalk.
right.
So in the rural area, if we didn't have a boulevard, there's not a requirement if this was rural, because I think this is kind of suburban, I guess. It's not really, it's definitely not urban in my mind, but there wouldn't be that raised requirement for that 8-foot path though, right?
Oh, in the rural
In the-
area, you mean?
In the rural area?
But would there
It'd still be 24 and 8, but it wouldn't be,
It wouldn't have the boulevard. So if you read the.
but it wouldn't have the raised, would it?
No, the raised is basically an added condition of approval that staff was recommending. When you read rural major subdivisions, it's that they should include a trail on at least one side of all roads, whereas when you read rural urban subdivisions, you have, it breaks it down additionally by unit counts in the urban area, but if you have fewer than 40 lots or units, you could have a wider sidewalk on one side as an alternative to a narrower sidewalk on both. Then when you get into the actual table, it has boulevard sidewalk and it has trail. So you have 2 different categories there. The trail doesn't establish boulevard standards.
So a sidewalk is assumed to be raised.
A sidewalk, yes, would be assumed to be separate, well, generally separated is how the regulations would provide it. So then, if it's raised or not, I don't know,
When you pour concrete, it usually goes up a little bit.
yeah, I mean, it could or could not be. It depends on when you separate 7 feet, the grade very well may be different over there, 7 feet over than it is at the road surface. So whether it's up or down once you get that separation.
So
depends
again, if this was rural standards, you could have a 24-foot wide road width and an 8-foot wide at-grade trail adjacent to the road.
That's correct. That's my reading of it, yes.
But it's in the urban area.
But this is in the urban
And
area.
so I guess if we're going to decide on a case-by-case basis whether we're going to hold a subdivision to rural or urban standards, then we shouldn't have a map that delineates what the urban and rural areas are if we are going to vary from that on a case-by-case basis with no findings.
Yeah, the big terminology difference I see between the urban and the rural is sidewalk versus trail.
Which usually means concrete versus asphalt?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we are at variance request number 1. Anyone want to step out on a limb?
Okay, and
And so what you just handed us, Tim, is from the subdivision regulations, correct? Yes.
Right, so with the existing variance that's in the application, I don't think you have to go through, it's always good to come up with findings regarding a variance. What I'm referring to are variances that didn't make their way through the process as part of the application. You probably should come up with findings based on those standards.
So for the planning board recommendation.
Right, that's right.
Okay, so if we go with the planning board's recommendation, it would behoove us to come up with some additional findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Yeah, and I do have those available on the screen as well, what Tim handed out.
And since there can't be an increase in public costs, and we're talking about publicly building that trail for that variance, is that okay since we've already committed funding to that at one point? So it won't increase it, it'll be above what it would have been, but we'd already approved the funding. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we've,
It sounds like you're making that finding. Yeah, I mean, it seems like
there was already clearly a commitment on the part of Missoula County to commit funds to build the trail at one point in time, prior to this proposal coming before us. Okay.
All right, so I have to see what,
So the first,
okay, so to ask a question then, if I wanted the result to be a 24-foot road with an 8-foot at grade, if I say sidewalk, does that mean asphalt? I mean, that means concrete.
Well, I don't know if the regs specify concrete 100% on that.
Do they have a definition of sidewalk and a definition of trail, or?
I mean, I'm just wondering if it needs, which word I should use.
Sidewalks shall be constructed of concrete unless an alternative material is approved to be consistent with the subdivision design and overall development plan or the Missoula Active Transportation Plan. So you could go to say that asphalt is alternative material consistent with the design of this subdivision.
So that's what's already proposed. So if we want to go back to that, we just strike what the planning board said, the 4-foot.
If you want what the applicant proposed, you would take staff's recommendation and just scratch the condition from it,
And that
which would be,
condition number,
this would be recommended motion number 1 on your screen.
Yep.
And it would be approved based on the findings of fact and staff report, public testimony. You'd be just striking the condition to raise it 6 inches. That would give you an 8-foot trail with no boulevard. That doesn't talk about the road standard because the road standard was applied for to be the width that needed to be at 24 feet. So there's no variance request associated with that.
okay. And then the condition that requires it raised is back under non-motorized?
No, as I mentioned, that condition was only with the variance findings in the staff report. So it didn't even show up in the master list of conditions. So you'd really just be striking it out of the motion, and then it's not even in your list of conditions.
so we'd strike the phase, if this is where Gene is going, the phrase be approved subject to one condition.
Well, you would leave be approved.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Garrick, I saw you coming up here. Is there something you wanted to add, or I'll take that as a no.
There's a couple things
Oh, okay, come on up.
that I will add. I'm Garrick Swanson with the Missoula County Parks and Trails program. To add to this conversation, according to the AASHTO guidelines, what's being proposed is a shared shoulderway, and then that does not meet the definition of a trail or a pathway. It's a shared shoulderway on the shoulder of the road. And then second, I just wanted to point out for your consideration, in the county subdivision regulations 3.4.9.4B, boulevard elimination. If the Board of County Commissioners choose to go that route, there's some criteria listed there for consideration.
Which staff already considered, right?
Yeah, so there's an alternative method, I suppose, of eliminating a boulevard instead of the applicant requesting it through variances. The county commissioners can essentially deem that one of those criteria fit and say, you're waived of that requirement. The way it's worded in 3.4.9.4 there, In this case, the applicant requested a variance to eliminate it, which could get to the same result two different ways.
So it would be a denial of the variance and an addition of a condition of approval? Is that?
No, not necessarily. You'd basically be rendering that variance request as not applicable anymore because you're making findings of how to eliminate a boulevard instead of them requesting eliminating the boulevard.
Oh, do you have that pulled up?
I can. So here under subpoint B, the Board of County Commissioners shall eliminate the boulevard to allow a sidewalk adjacent to curb when the modification satisfies one of the criteria below. And
But it does says then that would have to have a curb, which it would have to be raised at that point if we went that route.
Yeah, how would this relate to the so-called shared shoulderway if it's using language of
The subdivision regulations don't have a definition or contemplate a shared shoulderway. It talks about a trail as being kind of what a shared shoulderway I think Garrick's getting into here. There's perhaps more definitions than we've ever contemplated in the subdivision regulations of what you could call all these things. What I think the focus here is on what the applicant's requesting is at grade, asphalt surface all the way across. How we want to deem that, I guess we can debate, but I mean, that's what the intent is of the applicant. In case there's any confusion, I think we all kind of grasp that though.
Okay.
Okay, so that one says adjacent to a curb, so I think what Cola said is right. I don't see that we can make one of those four findings because it isn't adjacent to a curb.
Also, reading through these criteria, it doesn't seem like this situation necessarily satisfies those situations that would allow us to do that. So I think a variance is a more appropriate approach.
Okay. Jean?
All right, I would move that these are conditions, right?
This would be a variance
Variance
request,
request.
a recommended motion.
That the request to vary from table 3.4.9.4 non-motorized standards to relieve the applicant from creating a 7-foot boulevard between the sidewalk and the vehicular traveled way of road A be recommended to the Board of County Commissioners for approval, strike, subject to one condition, based on the findings of fact in the staff report and public testimony. Although we'll need to change a little bit of the staff findings too, right?
And I think also
That gets us back to
We're just-
24 and 8, doesn't it?
I believe so, but we're approving it, not recommending to the Board of County Commissioners.
Yes, correct. And
Right, I'm sorry.
as I mentioned,
That we approve.
That's okay.
yeah, the RCA is the same as the staff report, which
I'm reading the wrong line.
yeah, we could have the staff report stays the same from planning board to here. So when the planning board makes the motion, they read it that way. Your motion would be as shown on the screen. It reads a little cleaner.
So I'd move to strike, subject to one condition.
Okay, I'll second that. Further discussion or are there any additional findings of fact you'd like to add to support that?
I just think that mostly the design of this subdivision mimics the design of the one that works well. And I just believe that from the stuff that we've seen today, it does create a safe place for people to walk in a low-traffic area that is not, a big public road. And also allows for the owners to maintain it well and people to get around without having obstacles of raised areas.
Cola, additional discussion? And so just to clarify, the effect of this would be a 24-foot road width with an adjacent 8-foot trail, shared shoulderway with a
This variance is focused totally on the trail, so we want to keep the road as its own standard. So
Right.
we tried to keep it separate, which is why planning board staff's recommendation to them was, since they wanted to go that route, was to add a variance instead of just significantly amending one, so that you can take it in pieces. So this is focused totally on the trail. So the road request would be as planning board recommended variance 4. So just note that as the application stands, it's a 24-foot.
Because they didn't
Wide
ask for a
road.
variance from the road.
They did not.
Okay, we've had motion and a second discussion. Let's go ahead and vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. That passes. Next variance request.
I would move that variance request number 2 read that the request to vary from subdivision regulations 3.4.9.1.3 to relieve the applicant from constructing a pedestrian trail along Highway 200 frontage be approved based on finding of fact in the staff report, public testimony, and the commissioner's previous committal to the public trails bond money toward this important piece of infrastructure. I think we're going to have to add one then to add, no, they have the 25-foot thing.
Did we want to add the condition of the Grail Loop section
Would we need to
easement?
add, yeah, would we need anything in this motion similar to the original language in variance request 1 that said something like subject to approval of one condition, or?
If you're going to make a condition that would be directly related to it, yeah, we could note it in that motion so that, we see where it's coming from, but then that condition would ultimately show up in the master list of conditions.
Okay.
Okay, so I would include adding there where it says, based on finding fact in the staff report and subject to one condition and public testimony. So just insert that in there.
Tim, do you think we need to go a little bit more in depth as to why that offsite mitigation meets?
It always helps to add a finding
We can
as to how it assists the folks in this mobile home park, as opposed to just being a general public good. That's sort of the nexus and proportionality legal stuff that's pretty important when requiring these sorts of public improvements for a subdivision.
So would something, and we don't have a second yet, but I would say, would something along the lines of facilitating access for these folks if at such a point in time a trail connection to the west is built or
I
constructed?
think that's fine.
Something like that.
So that they could access the larger commuter trail. And in a case like this is a more general question, not necessarily specific to this, but the fact that it was almost done as a trade, that the developer, and it's going to save these residents money because they're not going to have to put this infrastructure in, but then in tradesies, they're going to give us more. Does that count as a reason legally for us to be able to do it because it's to the general benefit of the project and the public and these people? Or does it have to really specifically benefit the residents?
I think as long as there's some benefit to the residents, it's fine. It just can't be strictly a public benefit. It has to
Right.
benefit these residents in some way.
Okay.
So we could say findings as amended today, but the actual finding doesn't go in the motion. The finding ends up back here in findings, right? So that always makes it dangerous because we have now just gone, this approval goes against the existing findings that now we're going to need to manipulate to say what has been said here by the commission today, right?
So it'd be based on the amended filing findings in the staff?
Yeah, we'll certainly amend the approval letter to reflect your findings, and if there needs to be either deletion of the original staff recommended findings or alteration in some way, we'll go ahead and do that.
Mr. Hart, are we going off the legal rails here?
No, we're not. You never want to come to a public meeting with findings and conclusions set in stone. They need to be preliminary only, and they need to then, when they are finalized, they need to reflect what the public comment was, what the discussion was, what your deliberations were, and all of those other discussions that happened at the public meeting. So you're acting appropriately.
And we don't have to wordsmith the findings today because staff can do that based on the conversation and the record.
Correct.
But we'll, at the end, we make a motion to ask staff to do that? Or we just expect?
You don't even have to make
Okay.
a motion to ask staff to do that. It's just, that's what should happen, and then, ultimately you'll sign whatever decision you make, and those will have the final findings and conclusions.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on this? All in favor? Aye.
Okay.
Variance request number 3.
Okay, that one doesn't change at all, right?
So this is to the Pine Grove Lane, which is the road which serves those 6 or so off-site property owners down there.
I would move that the request to vary from Table 3.4.7 road standards, relieving the applicant from the road improvement standards for Pine Grove Lane, which require a local road serving approximately 6 off-site dwellings to be paved and 24 feet wide, be approved based on finding of fact and staff report and public testimony.
Second, with the comment that we did read the public comments that we did receive on this and understand that the neighbors aren't excited about this prospect, but I think it's completely, it's great to maintain access to those properties and actually improve it and have a different road plan. I think that's part of what happens with development is changing things that have been like that for many years, and it upsets the neighbors, but I think this is an appropriate development, so.
Thank you. Got a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All in favor? Aye.
So we do have the number 4 that was presented to us from the planning board, but our conversation has led to not accepting that. But do I need
Go back to that.
say we delete it? That we reject number 4?
You wouldn't necessarily need to delete it. You just wouldn't be making that motion, I think, is probably the.
So the other thing
Cleaner.
then that came to us from the planning board was to amend the conditions, but since we're going with staffs, we don't have to delete that either.
So they amended 2 conditions as shown on this screen here.
Right.
In which case, if you're not making motions to alter any of the conditions, then, we just need to make it clear that whatever motion you make on the subdivision, if it's for approval, it's subject to the conditions found in the staff report or in the planning board report or some amended version of it, just to be clear which conditions you are adopting.
Okay. Do you feel it's needed to add municipal sewer system? There could be one in Bonner someday, but I think that all the health board regulations apply, so.
I think it does get captured based on what I've heard from the health officials at other public hearings where this similar context has come up. So, I think it covers it. I don't think it hurts to have that extra statement on there, but.
So how narrowly defined I guess, how is municipal defined?
Public is all.
So you could have a
On or something.
smaller community system and that would still follow under the umbrella of municipal. So I guess this would be the belt and suspenders approach, so to speak, to have this language in here, even though it might not necessarily be needed.
That's my thoughts. John, did you?
I'd recommend that you put it on the plat because it's just an added piece of notice to the public, and there isn't any harm in doing it.
My question is the definition of municipal and if that like specifically refers to incorporated municipalities and if we should say public sewer system instead of municipal in case
Well,
Bonner gets
it says municipal sewer system or community or municipal water system. I don't know if community is the catch-all
Right.
there.
and that's talking about the water system.
Right.
But should we say a community
sewer.
sewer system or a public? But that actually has a definition in health regs too.
But yeah, so
So-
public, this will be a public system that they're on. It's
Right.
public because of the amount of users on it. So, what planning board's motive was to catch when either the city of Missoula extends their system all the way around Highway 200 to get there, or there's some sort of a larger Bonner, Milltown, West Riverside localized system there. What term is appropriate for that probably gets more into health definitions because they're the ones really regulating heavily with all these specifics.
Could we ask them for the right and come back to it? Because I know that there are like specific definitions of what public is, what community is, and what, so I don't want to.
Yeah, could we qualify our motion that, in a way that the appropriate language would be inserted here? I think the intent is for a public system, and if municipal is not the right word for that, then.
Right.
You could modify the condition so as to say that with appropriate language reviewed by the health department to meet the intent of a system that's supporting or extended from a larger system or something.
I guess I don't even know. I know with like traditional septic systems, that is kind of built into the regs, but with a level 2 system and it being an actual public system that is regulated by DEQ, is that different than when we're talking about regular septic systems as far as the health regs? And when things have to connect to municipal systems. I think we could use some health department guidance on this.
So how do we get there, short of having the guidance today? Tim, an answer.
At least on the waterfront, it does read community or municipal water system. That's if you have, say, a 10,000 gallon storage tank and you don't have 1,000 gallons per minute fire flow. You are technically supposed to have a waiver on the plat that you'll connect to such a system if it's available. So it does read community or municipal water system.
Could we say the
I don't-
same thing for sewer, community or municipal sewer?
Because what they've installed what they plan to install is a community system.
Yeah, and I don't have that language.
And if they're
Well,
if they're
let me
not
s-
under the health
let me
regs, it's
check.
going to be required to hook up to a bigger system if it comes in because they're already a public system. I wouldn't want to make them.
I don't either. I mean, I think there's a lot of investment here, and our goal is to protect the water. And I think it happens with this because this has to be maintained. It is a community system. It is monitored. It has to have reporting. So, there really is no incentive unless this system at some point in time fails and there is a community system. And of course, they're going to connect.
Yeah, so I think it's safer to
we
just
need
leave it.
suspenders.
Yeah, I think we should.
So we don't need to take any action here since this was a planning board
Yeah, you would just be going back to staff's
Okay.
recommended motions on that.
So Casey, do we still need one more condition, I believe? This is the language that I've made up. I'll see if you think it works. I would propose a new condition under, I guess it's under the trail one. You'll tell me where it goes. As additional mitigation, the developer will provide a 25-foot future trail easement along Highway 200 on Grile Court property to the west of Woody Mountain Court property. Does that sound like it catches it?
Second, if it does.
Seems to catch what you had mentioned earlier with the variance
Okay.
motion.
Okay, motion and a second. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And then I would, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so do we need to do anything along the lines of Planning Board Recommendation 8 to reflect, I think we now have effectively have an 8-foot wide pedestrian trail, is that correct?
Yes, and planning board inserted that, so that was a totally new motion, so that's not
Right,
in
so,
staff's recommended motion that shows up in the staff report, so.
but without this, we get an 8-foot,
Yes,
trail.
there's the 8-foot trail as proposed in the application.
okay. So is the other motion, I guess, I'm not sure if the commission's
Final
interested in this,
Oh, go ahead.
besides the overall motion to approve or deny, is there any interest in, I guess it would be the Forstein option B, to create a small trail connection from the eastern edge of the subdivision up along Tamarack?
I just think it ends up creating, for folks who, it ends up creating confusion on public-private. While it's good for these folks, I'm sure because of, you can see how the other court ends up being kind of a community that if somebody wants to walk across the lawn and get there, there's probably nobody gonna yell at them, where it could create a confusing, the trail ends at Tamarack, and now all of a sudden, oh, here's a nice trail, and now we end up on this road, and then we went through there, and I think it just creates a invitational trespass. I made that all up.
I think it's confusing to not have a public easement on this and then invite people to it with a trail. On the other hand, as if I was a resident here, I would like to be able to access that to go up and access the trail at Tamarack. So I don't know if it's or if the applicant has an opinion on the benefit to its own residents as opposed to the inviting of other people in onto their private roads.
Bob?
Bob Kreil. I'll be honest with you, I didn't really think about that, but I think you're right. I think we could have more problem with people coming into the court, and then I'm going to have a lot of problem with those folks complaining about what are all these people doing in our driveway and our walkway. So maybe it's something I'm going to figure out in the future how I can get those folks out, and they'll say, you're right, they get creative, they may figure it out on their own what they want to do. So maybe I would probably be happier to reject that idea now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, good points.
Since we
Okay.
spend a lot of time dealing with neighbor issues, I don't want to create any new ones.
Okay, are we ready for the main motion?
Right, so I would move that we approve the Woody Mountain Court subdivision as amended today.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Staff clear on all of this?
I believe so.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks everyone for hanging with us. And is there any other business to come before the commission today? Okay, we'll be adjourned or in recess.